Money FM 89.3, best of weekends.
Talk about what's happening in the U.S. state of Georgia. Senate runoff elections will take place on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, after a whirlwind 2-month campaign. If Democrat Jon Ossoff can beat the first-term Republican Senator David Perdue from Georgia, and fellow Democrat Raphael Warnock can defeat Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler, the Senate will be split 50-50 between the two parties. That would mean the tie vote would go to the vice president, in this case, Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, which means the Biden administration would basically run both the House and the Senate. With us now to break this down, Andreas Preuss, radio host, WRAS 88.5, joining us from Atlanta, Georgia. Andreas, good morning. Welcome to Singapore.
Well, good morning and Happy New Year to you and your listeners.
Well, thanks, Andreas. Man, you sound nice and clear this morning. That's a great headset.
You know straight away he's a radio host. Crisp, clear, and to all future guests.
Andreas, let's get right into this runoff election that's happening on coming Tuesday in Atlanta. 2 runoff elections. Break it down. I gave a little bit of an intro to it, but tell us a little bit more about the players and what's expected to happen where we're at right now.
Well, you know, Georgia is the center of the election right now. So Georgia, which has been predominantly Republican in the last 15, 20 years, turned Democratic in the presidential primary against Trump and Biden, going towards Biden. It was very contentious. The governor, who's Republican, Brian Kemp, was an ardent supporter of President Trump. Of course, once the numbers started getting squishy and the votes were coming in and the mail-in ballots, you know, there were certain things that Trump wanted to get the state back. That didn't happen. So he's been very personable in his attacks against Brian Kemp, the Republican. And you've also have the 2 Republican senators, Kelly Loeffler, who was appointed, and then David Perdue. They're both Republican incumbents. And then you've got some newcomers. Not necessarily, in one case, Raphael Warnock, the Reverend Raphael Warnock, who is the senior pastor at the famous Martin Luther King Church in Atlanta, the Ebenezer Baptist Church. He's a senior pastor there. And then Jon Ossoff has run for Congress and lost a couple of years ago. So he's running against David Perdue. And then Warnock is running against Kelly Loeffler. So, you know, it's the center of the universe right now in American politics, and that, like you said, can and will determine the fate of the U.S. Senate, whether it stays Republican or goes Democratic. And I can tell you guys, I mean, just the amount of money being spent in these past weeks, $500 million. I mean, the phone calls, the texts, the television ads. I mean, look, I understand commercial broadcasting needs to make money, but just the amount of ads and flyers you get in the mail, I mean, you're getting full posters of evil people being painted by the challenger. Yeah. You know, just some nasty stuff going on out there. You know, and when you're a pastor, in Warnock's case, I mean, he said things from the pulpit that, you know, are very controversial. You know, he said you can't serve God in the military at the same time. That became an anti-military comment. There's been other comments like that where it's just gotten very nasty. Not you know, mudslinging is a tradition in American politics, and you're seeing it play out here.
Well, yeah, there's been a few examples on the left side. The Democrats have accused the Republican candidates of having connections to the Klansmen, to the KKK. I've seen Republicans suggest that if the Democrats get in, it'll turn Georgia into this socialist state. So it's very interesting to me, Andreas. It's acting out almost as a microcosm for the presidential election that we've just seen. A high early voter turnout, over 3 million early votes. Does that give an indication? Look, no one has a crystal ball, that they could be more Democrat-leaning as they ended up being with the presidential election? And do you see it being similarly close? I mean, Georgia was won by Biden by just over 12,000 votes out of something like 5 million. Yes, you're right, first Democrat to carry the state since 1992, but it was extraordinarily close. Do you see something similar happening here?
I do, and the polls, at least at this time, are still neck and neck between all the candidates that are running in this race. And as you just said, 3 million early voters. I mean, that's a record. 2 million of them were in person. people going to the polls, and they closed in the last couple of days, and then 1 million by mail-in ballots. And traditionally, Republicans have always come out stronger on the runoffs, because Republicans always have this image of they come to vote, rain, shine, sleet, snow, they'll be there at the polls. And of course, with the early voting and the mail-in ballots, that's changed because of the pandemic. And you saw that play out, where in some states you had, and President Trump was right to say he was ahead. He was ahead by a lot of by millions or tens of thousands. And then once those mail-in ballots came along, it was game over. You saw that state after state after state. And what the analysts are saying here is that it's not going to be the traditional Republican turnout that turns it, at least for the early voting. And it is, at least from what they're seeing in heavy Democratic districts, that there are more voters coming out in those districts, especially African Americans, to vote early. So, and there was one comment that if you're playing on the red team, it's going to be a tough battle.
The red team, of course, being Republicans, the blue being Democrats. Talking with Andreas Preuss, radio host, WRAS 88.5 FM in Atlanta, Georgia, about the runoff race for the U.S. Senate coming up this Tuesday against Democrat Jon Ossoff and Republican David Perdue and Democrat Raphael Warnock and Senator Kelly Loeffler. Andreas, much has been said about the effort that has been put into now rallying both sides, Republicans and Democrats. Of course, Trump and Biden have both been there already. They're going there again apparently on Monday to do more campaigning. This get out the vote in predominantly traditionally Democratic areas like Atlanta, Fulton County, which is that center part, the core, and some other areas, has also been met with an equal effort to get out the Republican vote in some of the more rural areas across the state, and down south, I believe, toward Valdosta and other areas. How is that? How has that looked from your perspective? Have they both been equally effective in trying to get to those Democratic or Republican base voters?
Well, you mentioned Valdosta, and a couple of weeks ago, Trump was in one of the largest cities in South Georgia, and the turnout was phenomenal. I mean, it was just a massive turnout there. And then he's coming Monday, election eve, to Dalton, Georgia, which is North Georgia. So you see the extreme southern part of the state, Valdosta, and then the extreme northern part of the state, which is Dalton. You're heading up into the mountains up there. And then VP Pence, Vice President Pence, is also coming on Monday. So yeah, they're trying to get these folks to the polls to vote on election day. That's where they're trying to make their staking their claim, is that our people are going to turn up on election day. But like I said previously, that's traditionally been a Republican thing anyway. But I think they're just trying to convince people everyone needs to come out, because it's a close race. But it's a close race.
Those areas like Dalton and other areas, those are not high density areas. Those are very, very rural, are they not?
They are. But there's industry up there. Dalton is famous for its carpet manufacturing. So there's good industry up there. There's some decent money up there. But they basically given up on Fulton County, because that's where most of the problems were with the voting count, and there were problems, but they've given up on Fulton County, which is the largest county in the state, and they're trying to work these boundary counties at where they're they got a lot of people. Now, what you mentioned about the socialist thing, that's the picture that's being painted about all Democrats now. You're a socialist, It's not the moderate Democrat, which is more of a Biden Democrat. It's the more of the AOCs and the Pelosi's and the Schumers, that it's, you see their picture in every ad against Warnock and Ossoff. You'll see a picture of them. That's the socialism that they're trying to paint, is that these people will bring you socialism. And they have, there's been ties to China with Ossoff that have been kind of not really investigated by, the media. Fox News is doing big stories on it, but nobody really else is. And then, like I said, Warnock said many things on the pulpit which could be interpreted in the heat of the moment, when you're preaching, you're using powerful words.
Yeah.
And when you make your living talking, some of those words could be taken out of context or put into a certain context to fit a narrative. But yes, the socialist thing is something you see in every ad that comes on radio or television now.
Wow.
Well, that was going to be a question, actually, for you, Andreas. Today, our time, Republican Senator Ted Cruz and several other Republican senators have launched another attack against the voting process, alleging again, suggesting they won't endorse the electors, suggesting again, hinting again of voting discrepancies and so on, playing up this conspiracy theory, if you like. And I find it interesting that it's on the same day that the US crossed the 20 million case numbers for COVID-19. I can't help believing that's a coincidence. So you have COVID-19, you have allegations of voter fraud, you've got conspiracy theories on socialism. You're there in Georgia. What are the issues that you think are really going to play with voters now?
Well, another main issue is criminal justice and crime. We've all heard the headlines. Crime is up. Murder is up in New York City. Murder is up here in Atlanta. You've had children being shot and killed by stray bullets because of fights and things like that. Just last week, they had a 7-year-old girl that was shot in the head driving by with her parents, driving by a very popular mall in Atlanta. Glenn knows it, Lenox Mall.
Oh,
and
wow.
There was a fight, gunshots rang out, and the little girl was hit in the head. She died a couple of days later. So crime is a major issue. Of course, social justice, racial justice is another big issue. The economy. There's so much out there to do. But what's another interesting thing is with the whole election is that both Loeffler and Perdue were running against the vote's illegal, and then they're saying vote for me. So, so you're telling me it's a bad voting system, yet go out and vote.
It's a bad voting system if I don't get the vote myself.
Thank you. And then they clarified themselves. But at first, they were campaigning against the vote.
Well, and that's
telling people to go vote.
And that's what Trump was saying, too, right? Don't vote. It's a rigged election. Stay away.
They were towing the line.
Yeah, so it's this weird thing. And, of course, nobody accuses the votes that they won as being illegitimate. It's just the votes that the Democrats won. So, anyway, that's a whole other can of worms there.
And just back to your pandemic question, the pandemic, or let's just say COVID-19, has become so political.
Yeah.
At first, it was wear a mask, don't wear a mask. Wear a mask, don't wear a mask. You wear a mask, you're a Democrat. You don't wear a mask, you're a Republican. Send your kids to school, don't send your kids to school. Online learning, in-class learning. Then, now the vaccine. Take the vaccine, don't get the vaccine. Who's getting it, who's not getting it? This has all just been a very confusing thing for people because it is confusing. Just the messaging from public health officials and the federal government and state officials has been just all over the place. And Glenn and I, we've talked about that in the past, how people get confused. And now you are hearing, I was walking down the street today and I met a 93-year-old woman who was a neighbor, and she said she was walking down the street and a family of 3 said, don't come near us. We've all got the COVID. Okay, so where do they live? So yeah, it's still happening. Unfortunately, it's not nearly as fatal as it was. But yeah, that's the COVID-19, and like you mentioned, this 20 million mark. That's amazing. That's amazing.
Andreas, I've got to ask you the blunt question: the issue of race and demographics. Let's be very blunt here. You've hinted at criminal justice. You've hinted at law and order and crime. One of the key issues for the state of Georgia during the presidential election was that racial and ethnic diversification that's taken place in Georgia, particularly in the metropolitan areas. More African Americans have moved in. There's an element of white flight in some of the Atlanta suburbs, which arguably shifted the vote more towards Democrat. How serious is the issue of race? Let's be blunt now. In this election, on the one side, you've got this concept of perhaps white flight. On the other side, you've got this issue of what race means in terms of law and order and crime. How do you see it playing out?
Well, like we mentioned, this is the home of Martin Luther King Jr., and, this is where he had his church, and this was his headquarters. You've also got a history of civil war here. This is, Kennesaw Battlefield and, the Atlanta, the burning of Atlanta. So there's the two civils, I say, the Civil War and civil rights kind of coexisting. The racial component, it's about getting African Americans out to vote, and you are seeing that turnout now. You are seeing that in these counties at least in the early voting, that the African Americans are coming out to vote. Now, the city of Atlanta has an African American woman as the mayor. She was quick to support Black Lives Matter, which wouldn't be surprising. There was an incident here in Atlanta where police shot and killed a African American who fell asleep in the line of a Wendy's drive-thru at 1 or 2 in the morning. So police were called. This guy's just blocking the lane. He fell asleep. He got out of the car. He was shot and killed. That sparked days of protests. I mean, days of protests. The Wendy's was burned. An armed militia came in, a black armed militia, which then the city, basically, the mayor said, let them control their neighborhood. Well, guess what? A small child was shot and killed by, random gunfire. And the city is now being sued for millions of dollars by that family. That basically the mayor just said, look, the black militia, you take care of the neighborhood. Atlanta police backed off. This incident happened. I mean, it's crazy and it's confusing. And where I live in Buckhead, which is, I don't want to say an upscale neighborhood, this is where the shopping malls is. This is where the shopping malls are. There was looting, the whole kind of street racing thing has happened, which is a phenomenon that's in America. That's not just happening here in Atlanta, where these souped up cars just kind of take over neighborhoods. They show up, they do, drifting, and you can hear them all. The police are chasing them at night.
Which is genuinely scary, right, Andreas? For voters, that's genuinely scary.
Look, I'm from New Orleans, and I was used to police sirens all day and night because it's New Orleans. And it's just a very violent city. It's also a smaller city. Now in parts of the city, you would never run across crime. And not that we're insulated or that we're living in some kind of bubble, but just every day you're hearing reports of gunshots, police chases, these souped up cars, street racing, drag racing on a Peachtree Street, which is a major thoroughfare in Atlanta. So are these all African Americans? Yes, the majority are, but they have arrested some white people doing this as well. But Atlanta, racial, it's always been kind of a hotbed. But one of the slogans of the city is that it's the city too busy to hate. And I think you have one of the largest black middle classes here. It's a very successful city, as in economy. You've got Home Depot, UPS, Delta, Coca-Cola. These are major companies based here in Atlanta that are giving people jobs. Even today, there's tons of jobs available from those Fortune 500 companies. So it's a city that has, like any big city, it's going to have problems. And then when you kind of talk about defunding the police, and even though it's been kind of pulled back a bit, like they're not just going to cut police departments. There's not going to be any police. We're not having any police. No. Once that message gets out there, I mean, people take advantage.
Yeah.
That's not surprising that people say, look, if I go out and police were not going to, just if there wasn't a violent act involving a disturbance, they wouldn't roll on that call. If you had a home burglary, they may not show up. They warned you. Don't, and look, everybody was at home anyway, so you didn't have an increase in home burglaries because everybody's at home in the pandemic. But once people get that message, there's fear from the general public. Oh my gosh, they're going to, cut the police budget. And on the other side, the criminal's like, hey, let's roll. I mean, we got stuff to do. So I think you did see that play out.
Yeah.
Fascinating stuff. Andreas, good luck on Tuesday with the election. And hopefully
I'm going to the polls. I don't vote early. I go day of. And my two daughters did early voting. And, God bless the young people.
Yes.
It's important. And you do see them engaged. And one daughter is 20, the other's 23, that they're out there voting as well. So it's great to see the young people engaging with politics because it is important.
Andreas, I can't resist it. Any predictions?
As Glenn knows, we're not in the prediction game.
We're not?
As journalists. No, we're not. And I'm usually wrong, but I it's too close to call for me. It's too close to call.
Yeah, that seems to be what a lot what a lot of people are saying, and we'll certainly be standing by and watching. Perhaps we can get you on next weekend as well if your schedule permits, Andreas. I'd love to hear the follow up from you. In the meantime, thanks to Andreas Preuss, who is a radio host WRAS 88.5 FM in Atlanta, Georgia, updating us on the runoff next Tuesday in the state of Georgia. A lot at stake. Andreas, thanks for your time.
All right, have a good day.